We're here with David Wilcock, and we're very happy to be invited to his humble abode, which is not so humble, and won't say where. And David, welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Kerry. I've had the opportunity to be in the right place at the right time on many occasions with some really amazing people. And I've had a lot of really interesting experiences of my own, going all the way back to very early in my life. I read this book actually when I was 7 years old. It's called How to Make ESP Work For You by Harold Sherman. This book talks about ESP as if it were something that most people didn't understand, didn't know about. And that surprised me. Most kids in my grade were reading Clifford the Big Red Dog, and this book was obviously a lot more intense than anything most kids would read at my age. There were no pictures. It was kind of scary. You're looking at these little bitty words and trying to, follow it. But I was just so fascinated as a child with the concepts that I just got into it. And the other thing that I felt really drawn to at that age was books on hypnosis. And I've read both of these books beginning when I was 7 years old as well. I somehow felt that there was a connection between hypnosis and ESP, and didn't understand why I felt that way until much later. The next book that I really read was Erica Cheatham's Nostradamus Prophecies, 1985 and Beyond. This is when I first got into the idea that there was going to be some kind of event around the year 2000, which Nostradamus scholars typically would say is a cataclysmic event, a nasty event. And I saw that special on HBO where the Russian nuclear missiles are going to blow up the U.S., and they had Orson Welles narrating, and he goes into great detail about Nostradamus' prophecies. What triggered, why would a 7-year-old kid read books like this? Why would you be inspired to conduct such research at such a young age? Well, I was unusually intelligent, but more importantly, when I was 5 years old, I had a really pivotal event in my life, which was an out-of-body experience. I woke up in the middle of the night, and I was floating over my own body in bed, and I looked down and saw myself breathing, so it was clear that I was still alive. But I couldn't make sense out of why I was in two places at the same time, and why I still had these funny yellow pajamas with the red cuffs. Well, the event had such an impact on me that I saved the pajamas. They became sacred pajamas, and I never washed them again. I never wore them again. These pajamas were in two places at once, and I didn't understand how that could be, and so they became very sacred to me. I wake up the next morning, very excited. I tell my father, and he says, "Oh, you just had a dream." I went to school, and I told the kindergarten teacher, Mrs. DeMazzi. She says, "You just had a dream." Now, bear in mind, I was a typical silly kid. Mrs. DeMazzi told my friend Chris and myself to go trim the Christmas tree, and so we proceeded to take our little scissors and start cutting branches off the tree. So, I did kid things. I had rocks in my pocket and paper clips and gumballs, but at the same time, once this out-of-body thing happened, I saved the pajamas, and I said, I got to get another chance, because if I hadn't have been afraid, I wouldn't have stayed in the house, and I probably would have gone somewhere really fascinating. And I had so many UFO dreams where, in some cases, I would end up talking to someone who looked like, after I saw the movie Star Wars, it became Obi-Wan Kenobi. And he said that something really amazing was going to happen in the future on Earth. and that I had some kind of role in it, and that I would be guided. And most of the conversations I couldn't remember when I woke up, but I would be so overwhelmed with the emotion of the loss of this contact with him that I would wake up and just be devastated by the fact that I had lost that connection.
If we fast forward from that, which is a wonderful introduction to who you are today, you at some point became aware that you could be the reincarnation of Edgar Cayce.
Right. I did read the ESP book, and he said the younger you are when you start doing these exercises, the more psychic you'll be. I'm like, I'm already 7 years old. What am I? I'm never going to be very good now. Should have been doing this since I was 2. I read this book, Stephen LeBerge, Lucid Dreaming, and then Exploring the World of Lucid Dreaming in high school, and was able to have lucid dreams based on the techniques in this book. I would end up on the main deck of UFOs and talking to beings, and LeBerge's perspective is, hey, this is just your mind. There's nothing real about any of this stuff. So I would just wake up and laugh and be like, none of this means anything. In college, I quit using alcohol and all intoxicating chemicals. I did smoke some marijuana, and I quit that in my sophomore year. 6 months later, a friend comes in to my room. He had traveled a long distance to see me, and he was white as a sheet of paper, and he said, I got to tell somebody what just happened. What are you talking about? He said, I just had a conversation with my physics professor, and he said UFOs are real. Give me a break, man. Come on. So, but I was curious enough that I had him keep talking, and he basically said the physics professor offhandedly mentioned UFOs are real, and he was the star pupil, so after class, he talked to the professor, and the professor said, yeah, we know this is true. We meaning NASA. He had worked in the higher echelons of NASA for 11 years. We know this is true, but we're never going to let it go out on the main headline of the New York Times. And the reason why is that we shock tested the public with War of the Worlds and found out that they really can't handle the truth, because they're going to think that they're being invaded. They're going to think, they're going to panic. The economy is going to go belly up. So we just can't let this out. So there's a gradual indoctrination going on, getting people into this information. He said that the ship had a panel all the way around the bottom, and they pulled it off expecting to see components inside, and instead all they saw was this ceramic. So for a couple of years they didn't know what they were looking at, and they finally looked at the ceramic under magnification, high magnification, and saw all these lines on it. It turns out that this was a gigantic computer chip that ran the whole width of the ship, and it was a superconducting ceramic material, which means that electrons would flow through it without any loss. Now, from this, the professor said that we got fiber optics. They found burnt edges of fiber optic cables in the ships. We got Teflon, the non-stick material. It's a special material. We got Kevlar, bulletproof vests came from reverse engineering. Laser beams pass between two mirrors. One of them is semi-permeable. A beam comes out. Lasers came from the ships. LED lights came from the ships. Infrared night vision came from the ships. They looked through the porthole windows and they saw this green you could see outside at night. And computer chips, obviously. So what this really means is that most of the technology that we now have, including the technology that's recording my voice and that we're filming with, would not exist if it were not for this sort of celestial inheritance that we got in the 40s. Well, that just screwed my head right off. And for 2 weeks, I'd be walking down the street, I'd see a manhole cover, I'd think of UFOs. I'd go to the cafeteria, I'd have a plate on my... I'd be eating off this plate thinking of UFOs. I just couldn't get it out of my mind. After 2 weeks' time, I said, if this is real, and I believed it was, because he went into propulsion systems, how they could get to light speed. He went into 3 different types of occupants they found in the ships. If this is real, it's the most important thing there could possibly be to study. I finished college and I got my bachelor's degree in psychology, and I got a PhD in UFOs. This was the director of communications for the Apollo missions. Okay, this guy is the real deal, high-end NASA scientist who came forward in 1995 to say that they had discovered ruins on the moon. architecture on the moon. Well, this book went into so much detail about ancient civilizations and obviously showing that some sort of intelligence interfaced with ancient civilizations to get us to where we are now and to create these artifacts that we find all around the world. I became quite compelled with the evidence he presented, showing me that there had to have been a civilization that was highly advanced before our current one, which in most people's mind, you think of BC, you think of cavemen, right? Well, BC is only, 100 generations ago, and that's not a whole lot of time, really. So, basically speaking, we have a much older history. So, all this stuff is coming into my mind. I had started to write my dreams down when I got sober. That was part of my recovery process, because dreaming is a very important part of the lucid dreaming process. You have to capture a dream when it comes in, and then meditate on it and visualize yourself becoming lucid, meaning that you say, oh my God, I'm in a dream. I can levitate things. I can fly. I can snap my fingers and go to a whole different place. I can create people to talk to. I can create objects. I mean, I've had a number of these, and they are absolutely fantastic. But you have to remember your dreams and then repeat this line to yourself. Next time I'm dreaming, I want to remember to recognize that I'm dreaming. That's the key line. Next time I'm dreaming, I want to remember to recognize that I'm dreaming. So I already had a lot of experience remembering dreams. So I start remembering dreams, and I start getting all this information coming in from books. I read 500 books in 3 years. I had a list of all of them, and I submitted my application in the Ropa Institute, which is a graduate school in Boulder, Colorado, on transpersonal psychology, which is sort of like metaphysical psychology. And I handed them this list, and I said, name any book, and I'll give you a discourse on it. And I didn't get accepted, probably because my financial situation wasn't very good. Came back from Boulder. Now we're into 1996. I'd been doing this research for 3 years. And I was like, okay, why am I so compelled? Why can I not stop reading these books? I'm just so obsessed. There's got to be something more to this. I start having dreams in which UFOs fly overhead, and something shoots out of the UFO, and it comes spinning down, lands on the ground, and it's a telephone. And it starts ringing. Oh, shit. Yeah. Wow. And then I had this other dream where this ET kind of walked up to me, and all these books start flying out from behind it like a cyclone, and they're hitting me in the face, and it hurts, kind of. But as each book is flying past me, all these books that I'd read, it's like all the knowledge in the book comes into my mind at once. And I start seeing how it all fits together in this dream. It was like this incredible telepathic, overwhelming blast. And I woke up and I'm like, what does this mean? It's almost like they're saying, because if you're watching these videos and you're into the UFO subject, you kind of say to yourself, yeah, it's all out there, right? It's all something I'm reading about. This is like it comes into your mind, it's personal, it's part of you now, and it's what they want to talk to me, they want to have a conversation, they meaning whoever they is. What finally happened was I had a dream that said, okay, here's what's going to happen. You'll be able to hear, it was a ghost that was talking to me in the dream, and he said, you can hear me, but nobody else can. So I'll tell you what to say, and then you just dictate it into a tape recorder. So here I am. I've read 500 books. I get on the internet. And by this point, I had come across material called Ascension, or some people were calling it pole shift. I read the Nostradamus stuff, so I said, well, what's really going on here? Now, up until this point, I had almost entirely read empirical, science-oriented books about ufology, about metaphysics, about Atlantis. However, at this point, I started to get more into the possibility that somebody could intuitively communicate with these guys. I found a book by Dr. Norman Milanovich called We the Arcturians. And I wasn't 100% convinced, but I was relatively compelled by it. Then I found a book by Dr. Scott Mandelker called From Elsewhere. And I don't have it in front of me here, but this book says on the cover, the subculture of those who claim to be of non-earthly origins. And I looked at it in the store, And I'm like, this guy is really far out. But I held the book between my hands, which I would do, psychometry, and it was tingling so incredibly. It was like, it was electrical. Wow, all right. So I opened the book to the back, and it said, if you can answer these 12 questions in the affirmative about yourself, then you very likely are an extraterrestrial soul in a human body who's forgotten who you really are. Now this is really far out, way, way fringe stuff, but by this point I'd read 500 books on the fringe. It was like, okay. I start reading these questions, and it's like the most personal, insightful, almost invasive psychological description of who I really was underneath the mask that I'd ever seen. And I couldn't believe it. He doesn't even know me, and yet he knows me better than anybody, even my parents. How did that happen? And he's saying that this has to do with being an extraterrestrial soul in a human body. So I just devoured this book. This was in November of 1995, after I graduated college in 95. I go to my friend Jude's house. Jude and I did music together a lot, because I'm also a drummer and a composer. And Jude and I did automatic writing together on his suggestion, where you hold the pencil in your left hand, let it do what it wants to do. And I didn't think it was going to work. I thought it was kind of hokey. But we really meditated, and I felt this conscious connection to my third eye and trying to pull in energy from there. And all of a sudden, and the question we asked was, am I a wanderer, which is what they call these extraterrestrial souls. Am I a wanderer? I start feeling something coming in really strong, and I pull here really strong. And for all of 2 or 3 seconds, my left hand jumped into activity and did all this stuff. And I dropped the pen. Oh my God. Jude, turn on the lights. Something happened, man. This is crazy. So we turn on the lights, and the paper looked completely white. It was like, oh, what the hell? But then we looked really close, and it was very, very faint pencil. And it says, my hand had written forward and backward on the same line, and there were curves that intersected, and only because they collided with each other did it say, Christ cometh. Now I was not raised to be Christian. I went to the Presbyterian church maybe 4 times in my life. My mother had had a Bible upbringing, and then she really rebelled from it and got away from it. Christ cometh, and then the TH of cometh looked like the word Ra. Well, that's like the Egyptian god or something. What's that all about? Well, in the book that I had been reading from Scott Manelker, the entity that he based all this stuff on was called Ra. And it was a series of 4 books originally, then 5, called The Law of One. So after this happened, there was more than that. There was an encoded message. It said EC 4057 and oxen, and the and was a little ampersand symbol. The oxen I understood. I'd worked at a fair over the summer, and I bought a statue of an ox, which I thought represented my becoming a beast of burden in the working world. And the woman was from Kenya, and I said, well, what does this animal mean? And she says, oh, you American, always think symbol, something means something. Okay, well, this is an ox, right? You hitch it up to a plow, and it plows the field for you. She says, no, it's water buffalo, very dangerous. You get within 500 feet of this, you pray for death. So that surprised me. I said, okay, that means that somehow all this stuff I'm going through is going to help me be really strong. And going through the working world doesn't mean I'm going to be submerged, because I got out of college and I'd had my bills paid, I'd had all the books I could read, and then I had to support myself with like minimum wage jobs, and I did not want to be doing that. So I felt like I was going to be this burden, this beast of burden. Instead, the water buffalo is a powerful symbol. So here I am, months later. By this point, I'd gotten fired from the mental ward for being too friendly to the patients. And there's this EC 4057 at the beginning. Well, Jude says, hey, EC, isn't that like Bible, like Ecclesiastes? And it says Christ, right? So, okay. So we found the Bible, and there was no verse 40. But then we remembered, or Jude remembered, the whole chapter verse thing only happened later. Originally, you measured it by the number of verses from the beginning. So we counted 40 verses from the beginning. I'd just gotten fired from the mental ward, right? That's why I was upstate where my family was. Well, the first line says, For what hath a man toiled and labored under the sun? This too is meaningless. Then the very last line, line 57, said, to eat and drink and be happy in one's toil. This is the grace of God. So it was like somebody was up there with the Bible saying, all right, let's give him this. And then my hand does this thing, and it says, Christ cometh, and then it gives me a Bible quote, and it mentions the ox about my work, and then the Bible quote is about work, and in the middle was that famous line which was turned into the song Turn, Turn, Turn by the Byrds, to everything there is a purpose, to everything there is a season, and a time for every purpose under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to gather stones together, you know, all those things, all those opposites. And I was at a real turning point in my life. So I felt, okay, this is really powerful, crazy, but what do you do with it? I mean, after that, life just kind of returned to normal. So a few months later, I get this bill from my ex-girlfriend. I had a Japanese girlfriend in college, and we'd had a big, long argument on the phone, and I got a phone bill for like $200 or something. And I couldn't pay it, and I freaked out because it was going to make me broke. I was working for $5.77 an hour, taking care of developmentally disabled people in a residence facility. And I started screaming and crying, and I said, if you're out there, I want the fucking proof right now. I'm sorry. Just beep that or something.
No, okay, cool. No, really, I mean, it's fine.
People have told me I shouldn't swear, so.
Okay.
So if you're out there, I want the proof and I want it right now. Okay? So, and then I'm looking out the window and seeing if there's going to be UFOs in the window, and nothing happened. And then I'm trying to levitate this napkin on my plate, and it didn't levitate. My friend ended up calling, and he was going through AA and rehabilitation, and I realized, you know, I'm a heck of a lot better off than he is right now. And by the end of the night, I'd forgotten about it. Next morning, my buddy had a housemate, and he delivered pizza. He didn't even get home until after I went to bed that night. So he slept in until like 10 or 11 in the morning, and we had a rule, don't call us in the morning, period. So this one morning, the next morning after this happened, I get this little itch to go outside, start the car, so that I could warm it up because it was wintertime, really freezing outside. So I go out, I start up my Subaru, I come back inside, and there's Eric with pillow creases on his face, and he's on the phone. Okay, why is he on the phone? He hangs up the phone, he says, dude, I had a really strange dream about you. And I'm like, I can't listen to your dream, I gotta go to work, I'm late. Yeah, but this had UFOs, all these UFOs were in it, man. Okay. I'm listening. Right? So I'm listening. So he starts going into this dream in which this whole fleet of UFOs flies overhead, and people start panicking and running, and they're all hiding under things. It was like a big mall, but there was no ceiling on the mall. And everybody evacuates except for my ex-girlfriend, and he didn't even know that I'd had this event happen about her, and him and me. One UFO stayed, and this pillar of light comes down, and there's a flat disc on the bottom, okay? And there's a man standing on the disc wearing a white robe and sandals, but it clearly was not Jesus because he had gray hair and a gray beard. This is like a wise old man archetype. Well, he starts doing this discourse, and he says, we are your brothers, your long-lost family. You came from us, we came from you, we came from the one. We are all one. We are all connected. We are here now at this time because you are about to go through this amazing, fantastic, energetic enlightenment of your entire planet. Right now you're only seeing the bad part where you have the earth changes and you have the upheavals in your government and you're starting to see the rottenness in your society, but what comes after this is a golden age, far more incredible than you could ever imagine. And we are here to help you through this transition. So he eventually stopped. He gave this whole ascension discourse. And he's just standing there. And the girl says to Eric, shouldn't somebody go talk to him? And Eric says, well, I'll leave that to Dave. He's the UFO guy. He'll know what to say. So apparently they kind of prodded me along. This is his dream. I walk up to the guy, and he recognizes me. and we say some strange word to each other that wasn't in English, and then we hug each other. And he has his arm around me, and he looks at Eric, very serious now, and he says, "It is very important that you know that he is one of us." So Eric tells me all this, right? So then I didn't even have time to think about it. I'm like, oh my God, okay, that's the whole dream, great, gotta go. And I'm like driving to work, and I'm passing people, and I get to work, and it's a terrible day. And then I got out from work, and I was going to go visit my mother. So the next thing you know, I'm on the New York State Thruway driving north up to Albany. It's pouring rain. My windshield is fogging over. I can't see anything. It's very deadly. I might not even make it alive. I'm hydroplaning as I'm driving. And all of a sudden, in this condition where I'm just almost in tears already from that day, and just such a terrible day, I realized, wait a minute. I asked a question the night before in prayer, basically. And I got the answer, and the answer is yes. You are, one of us. I pulled the car over to the side of the road, and I just lost it. I mean, I knew in that moment that there was something I was here to do. And, when you really bring yourself back to that point where you first heard it, it's still just as potent as when it happened. And so my experience after that was again like, okay, what's next? What's going to happen now? That's when I started to get these dreams saying that we want to communicate with you. A year after I first had the automatic writing, I had now joined Richard Hoagland's discussion group online and met a guy named Joe Mason who had created a website soon afterwards called greatdreams.com. And he talked about something he called the dream voice. And he said, when you wake up in the morning and you can first remember your dreams, listen to the background noise in your mind and just write it down, no matter how cryptic it is or how nonsensical it sounds. Don't analyze it. That's the most important part. Do not try to understand it. Do not pay attention to it. Just let it flow through you and write it all down. Well, I was up so late and he's telling me all this great information. I'm falling asleep and I'm just trying to write it. I wake up in the morning and it's like I can still hear his voice. So I just start writing it down. And I get all the way done, and I have 8 pages of material, and it's weird. It almost sounded like schizophrenic ranting. But it said some very interesting things, and one of the things it said was, you should visit Chichen Itza, the Mayan pyramids. You can go there with your mind. Okay? You can go there with your mind. Well, that's astral projection. That's something I've been wanting to do all these years. I had the lucid dreams, but I'd never really been able to walk out of my body from a conscious state. I really wanted to be able to do that. So I'm reading this for the second time, really understanding it, and the phone starts ringing. And it felt like there was this tugging energy on me from the phone. Hello? Hey, Dave, this is your buddy from the Pine Bush UFO group. You want to come to a seminar on astral projection? I know that it's not likely that anybody's really going to want to believe this, but this is what really happened. I tried to get to the seminar. I got lost on the highway. I never made it. I ended up having to come home. So there were a lot of really synchronistic events happening. I started to get these readings. On the first day, it also said, one of our women, Teresa, a sibling, inoperative. The Christian, psychically. One of our women, Teresa, Mother Teresa, a sibling, mother. One of our women, Teresa, a sibling, inoperative. Something went wrong. Something's with her health, maybe, right? The Christian, Mother Teresa the Christian. One of our women, Teresa, a sibling, inoperative. The Christian, psychically. 5 days later, Mother Teresa had a massive heart attack. Oh my gosh, right? So then a little while later, and this is one of the stories I tell in the book, which we'll get to in a second. I did a reading for my housemate, Eric, and it said to him, you would be happy to know that your student loans for New Paltz have come in. And this is the college we were going to, State University of New York at New Paltz. Well, that didn't make any sense because he graduated from New Paltz already. So I actually asked it to be rephrased, and it said, you'll be happy to know your student loans have come in. You should visit New Paltz. So I told Eric about all this, and he was now a graduate student at SUNY Albany. Well, about a month and a half later, he walks into the house. He says, dude, you better sit down for this one. What's going on, man? He says, New Paltz called my mother. They were cleaning out the bursar's office, the financial office. There was a file cabinet up against the wall. It was one of the last things they had to remove. They pulled the file cabinet away from the wall. There's an envelope behind the file cabinet. Inside the envelope was a check made out to me, Eric, for $900, uncashed Stafford loan. And we needed about $879 to be able to pay our rent. So this was just like, wow. How did they, and then you start going through these loops in your mind, like, okay, how could this possibly have been done? What started to happen was that I would have a stack of cassette tapes. I would get about a month behind a lot of times on my transcriptions of this. I would dictate my dreams, and I would dictate whatever words I heard. The words were basically like a wisdom teaching, talking to me and saying, you know, spiritual principles, spiritual growth, talking about this ascension, saying there's this amazing thing that's going to come in your future. The whole planet is going to be going through this shift into a golden age. But I would get behind, and I'd have these stacks of tapes. And I would sit down a month after I dictated it or whatever. I'd start transcribing, and it would describe what I was doing right before I sat down at the computer, over and over and over again. You may remember that back in the 90s there was this little toy called a Tamagotchi. This little orange plastic thing, and little teenage girls would have it on their belts. And it was like a little chicken, and you'd feed the chicken by hitting the button. And so I had just gotten back from the convenience store. I saw a little girl with one of these things on her belt playing with it. I get home, pop in the tape, start transcribing it, and in the dream I'm saying, I'm seeing this little girl with some strange orange toy on her belt. A couple years later, another really dramatic story was I had a girlfriend at the time, Sabrina, as I call her on the website, and she came in to the house and I was transcribing, and she says, I got this really great story. You're going to love this. You stop the tape. Okay, cool. I just met this guy at the ARE. This is the Edgar Cayce Institute. I was now living in Virginia Beach at the time because the Cayce readings had said it was a safety land, and I felt that was a trustworthy thing, safe from earth changes or whatever. So she says, yeah, this guy just stopped in for one day. He's an old friend of mine, and he was telling me about this building where the top floor was built to look like a UFO. Little porthole windows you could look out. It was really neat. So I say, oh, that's cool. So then I go back and I hit play and I'm transcribing. I'm seeing a building with the top floor looking like a UFO. So I'm like, come over here. And hit play and took my headphones off, and we're just looking at each other like, you know, the hairs are standing up, right? It's, oh my God. So, long story short, I'm getting all these synchronicities all the time, and I'm saying this is world-class data, but do you think I want to go public about being an extraterrestrial communicator? Heck no. I'm working for $5.77 an hour in a developmental disability facility. The last thing I want to do is end up in the mental ward again, but as a patient, not as an employee. So I'm living this double life. By day I'm working, and at night I come home and I'm transcribing tapes. And these readings are coming through, and they're beautiful, amazing discourses on spiritual growth, enlightenment, consciousness, ascension. Whew. So finally the source, to make a long story short, tells me, you know, I finally had an out-of-body experience. And one of the things that you want to do when you go out of body, if you're a guy at least, is it's your desire body, it's your subconscious, so you want to have sex, right? So I tried to conjure up a partner. And then I would be standing there with my pants down, and then there'd be all these people standing around pointing at me laughing. And I was like, okay, well, you know, if I'm going to get humiliated this much, maybe sex isn't such a good idea in the out-of-body plane. But then it seemed like I found this one woman, and things started to go pretty well. And she took me back to her room, and I'm like, wow, now we're getting somewhere. But then she had a roommate in the room, this guy, and it's like the room is a mess. And so I start trying to convince them, hey, look, you know, I'm out of body. None of this is real. Watch this. And I took my hand and shook it and turned it into a bowling ball. And then detached it and rolled it down the hallway. And then when I do that, they just kind of like dissociate and they wouldn't look at me. And then if I'd stop trying to do stuff like that, they'd come back. But when I try to tell them I was out of body, they would like lose track of my talking. So I finally said, isn't there somebody who knows what the hell is going on around here? Right? And I turn around and there's this woman, and she's just looking at me with this incredibly serene face. And she's got gray hair and a purple dress. And she's standing there, and she's not saying anything, and I realize I'm paralyzed. I can't move. And I'm looking at her like, okay, what's going on? I can't move. And I keep waiting for something to happen, and I'm getting really freaked out, you know, because I'm paralyzed. She goes, you know you have to move, don't you? No. Well, I know you said something about Virginia Beach, and as soon as I said Virginia Beach, it was like I was free. And then this other woman comes out. I go down a hallway, and there's all these doors, and a door opens, and this woman comes out, and she says, you're from Bloomingtown. That means you're blooming, doesn't it? I lived in a town called Bloomington. So I'm like, all right, I guess I got to move to Virginia Beach. So it wasn't easy. I had $700, threw all my stuff in the car, drove down there, got a list from the ARE, Association for Research and Enlightenment, the Casey organization. And this guy who I'd connected with, Francis Sporer, the art director of Venture Inward magazine, the Edgar Casey magazine, says, I have got to meet you as soon as you get here. And, okay. Because I told him I was doing these readings and stuff, right? And I walk in, he walks up to the door because I ended up renting a room from his friend who lived in the condo across the way from his. And he opens up the door and he looks at me and he goes, my God, it is unbelievable. It's me. Me? What are you talking about? He's like, you look exactly like Edgar Casey. Exactly. Oh, man. You know, I'd already had this experience before I left from New York, in which there happened to be the only Northeast ARE study group was just a few miles away from my house. This guy Skip Weatherford was running it. And he secretly, you know, we were having these study group meetings in public, and he didn't want me to tell them, but on the side we were doing these hypnosis sessions where he would hypnotize me and I would end up channeling, and I was reading his mind. I would answer questions that he would ask before he would ask them out loud. And at one point, apparently, he said, well, isn't it's so strange that you can do this? And apparently in the channel, I opened up my eyes and I looked at him and I said, it is by nature of the continuity of consciousness that I can do this. It freaked him out because my eyes are black, you know, they're just like, it didn't look right. But that was also strange because I had these two crystals I would use under my hands when I do the reading. I put my hands on the crystals, and exactly as I did, this bolt of energy comes out of the wall from a wire, like about this long. And then he said, as soon as I left after that day, all the power in the house went off for exactly 1 hour. So strange things were going on like that. And then one day he says, you got to come over to my house right now. Right now. No, I'm serious. Right now. Okay, fine. So I go over there and he's got this magazine, and there's a cutout in the middle of the magazine with a picture in it. And the picture is of a face, and the face looks exactly like my face. And he says, throws it down on the desk, says, who's that? I'm thinking, okay, well, I've never been published, I've never been in print, it's clearly my face. And then I'm thinking, okay, well, all right, it's got to be the ARE magazine because it's got that pencil style that they use on the cover. Edgar Casey. Yeah, but who else does it look like? Oh, man. So I'm just like, I do not want to be Edgar Cayce. Okay. So then, but then I get this out-of-body thing. You know you have to move, don't you? And then you're from Bloomingtown. That means you're blooming, aren't you? And all this stuff happens, and so I go to Virginia Beach. The next thing you know, Francis is saying, I got to get you a meeting with Robert Smith, the director of the Venture Inward magazine. So we go to this Nawab Indian restaurant, which is down in Virginia Beach, a few streets back from the ocean front. I forget what the street is. Anyway, apparently I was sitting in the restaurant and I turned over and looked at him like this. And there's a picture of Edgar Cayce working at his desk and turning and smiling. So he walks in the restaurant and I look at him like this. And it's the spitting image of the photograph. And he says to me, he eventually confessed. He was trying to stay cool. He said, when I saw your face, I almost fell over backwards. You are exactly the same as Edgar Cayce in the way you look. Long story short, I ended up meeting everybody in the ARE. I'm living with a guy who's a Cayce scholar. He starts telling me all this stuff about Cayce because I hadn't really read too much about Cayce. I'd read about the Atlantis stuff, which I found fascinating. But other than that, I knew he was psychic and I felt his work could be trusted, but I hadn't really gotten into it because there's, 500, 600 Cayce books. But here's this guy I'm living with now as a result of the ARE contact who had been best friends with Gladys Davis, who was Cayce's apparently soulmate and secretary. I heard all the inside stories you don't usually hear, including the fact that he stepped on a stick and it went through his testicle and one of his testicles was dead. I heard all these stories about what the readings said about Atlantis and how all these people were reincarnations of each other and they kept reincarnating in groups together. And he kept kind of saying, you're probably Edgar Cayce reincarnated. And I'm, oh my God. Then we actually had Tom Johnson, the owner of the Heritage Store, which sells Cayce products, come into the house one night. My God, he looks just like Edgar Cayce. Here we go again, Jesus. So finally, he said, my contact Jim says to the guy I was living with, says, you got to ask your readings. You can't let this go on much longer. By this point, I knew I could trust them. So I finally said, I asked it in a very strange way, because when you're in trance, you're trying to get your mind conscious enough that you can actually ask a question, and then you have to sink back down to get the answer. So I said, I would like to incubate a question on my identity here related to Edgar Cayce, because I just couldn't say, was I Edgar Cayce in a past life? Well, the answer comes back, it says, Table Rock, which I don't know why they said that, still don't know. This is our boss. In short, the answer is yes. And then they pulled out the cheesy Spider-Man line, but with the answer comes great responsibility. Oh my God. I was pissed. After I had this reading, I did not want this to be the truth. And then, later on, I just said, what the hell, let me pick up Edgar Cayce's astrology chart, the natal chart, and then compare it to my own chart. It's called a bi-wheel, right? Well, I did that. And we've got Moon over Moon, Mars over Mars, Mercury over Mercury, Venus over Venus, Sun over Sun, and then Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune are all in these perfect aspect ratios to each other. 30 degrees, 60 degrees, 9 degrees. It was so locked in, precise, we eventually had somebody do an astrology comparison, found out that in a 127-year period after Cayce's death, there's only one time you could possibly be born where it would align that well with his birth chart, and that was my birthday, the exact day, time, location. Furthermore, it was also in the Chinese zodiac year of the ox. The ox. Oh my God. There it is again. So when I saw the natal chart, I literally ran into the bathroom and I'm hovering over the toilet, like ready to throw up. Because what do we know about Edgar Cayce? Cayce had a reading that said, in 1998, Rata, the priest, will return. Meaning Cayce's past life in the Atlantis apparently was this guy who helped design the Great Pyramid. He was one of the chief architects of the Great Pyramid. Rata, he was a prophet who foretold the destruction of Atlantis, fled the island, got into Egypt and then built this monument based on the technology they had and all this stuff, creating a gateway with this higher entity that was called Ra. Now that's not really in the Casey readings, except in a few places they mention Ra and Rata as two different entities in some prayers, which we have in the book. So then the source tells me, you have to go to the ARE and tell them about this. Oh my God, no way. I finally got dragged kicking and screaming into doing it. I had a meeting with somebody, told him the whole story, and he says, we get somebody in here every week who thinks they're the reincarnation of Kerry Cassidy. Everybody's hip to this 1998 thing and when he's going to come back. You're just another number. Get out of here, kid. But he also invited me to sell candy bars at a play they were running called Man of La Mancha. He says, well, let's just get you out in the community and see if anybody else recognizes you. So it's a really funny story, anecdote, to say Edgar Casey returned to the ARE and they gave him a job selling candy bars.
Impersonating Edgar Casey, right?
Yeah. So the last thing in the world I wanted is to be somebody else. How many Elvis impersonators can you mention by name? It's not like this is an honorable thing for me. The ARE did not take me seriously. In fact, this person was very belittling to me and said, well, I found out through the grapevine that the buzz inside the ARE was like, okay, we know this guy did drugs. We know this guy swears. He's young, he's impressionable. There's no use that we can have of him being Edgar Casey reincarnated. It doesn't do us any good. Because I was only like 24 years old. I mean, I was young, and yet I'd read 500 books and I'd started to write about this stuff. So in that bitterness of the betrayal from the ARE, I just got more into working with my source, and the source is saying you have to start taking clients and doing readings for other people. And if you don't do this, you're going to lose the ability to channel. Well, I really didn't want to do that. But by July of 1998, I was in Virginia Beach. Casey had a dream where he was back in Virginia Beach in 1998. The prophecy had been fulfilled, and I'm like thinking, oh, this is wonderful. I end up starting to take clients. The third client I had, this woman comes in, didn't say anything about herself whatsoever. She just sat down and wanted to start the reading. I'm like, well, I really don't want to do that, but okay. I wake up out of the reading and she's totally in tears. She said, your reading described exactly what's going on with my husband, the fact that we're living in opposite ends of the house, why we're fighting, what I'm going to have to do to make it better. I'm just so blown away. I can't thank you enough. Da, 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 da. So, you get this stage fright, but then once it started, it just happens, and it just flows through you. So then the source is saying, well, the other part of the deal was not only do you have to do readings for people, but you have to write a book. I didn't want to write a book either. I finally got a website in February 1999. I had written up some of my preliminary research into Ascension in 1998. I got online in February 99, and in a relatively short time laid out the case, including the photographic comparison of myself to Edgar Casey, started to get some interest on the internet, but I really didn't want to write a book and I didn't want to be known for that. I got hired on in 2000 to this thing called Time of Global Shift, which was a seminar tour about Ascension, and I was presenting scientific information about 2012 and planetary change. I started to have conferences, and I got on Art Bell, as I said. It was a short visit, then I had another visit again. Long story short, along comes May 2001, Dr. Stephen Greer Disclosure Project. I'd gotten on Art Bell now, I was doing these readings, I had a website, I was making all my money from taking clients, barely surviving because I charged very little at the time. I'm now not doing readings anymore. That's an important thing to point out because I have demand inundation, which some people would call a happy problem, but it got to the point that so many people wanted readings, I just couldn't possibly fill it. I go to the Disclosure Project and I meet 39 top secret witnesses to the UFO thing. And one of them was Sergeant Clifford Stone, who had experienced a direct encounter with extraterrestrials. And they said, well, he asked them, well, what's in it for me? And they said, a new world if you can take it. I remember that. That's what they've been telling me too. So by this point, I had a public presence. I didn't really talk about the reincarnation too much. I'm at this conference, and I'm meeting all these black ops guys, and it starts to become clearer and clearer the extent to which this UFO scenario is really true. I mean, when you're in the room, I was in the May 10th briefing, which was closed executive summary for members of Congress and VIPs. I happened to be a VIP because I was a public figure in the UFO field. Didn't have any money, wasn't really well known, but fine. So that event really transformed me and got me my first exposure to black ops people. One guy who had a reading, Winfrey, wanted to write a book, and it didn't happen until years later that I allowed this to be done, but we finally wrote this book called The Reincarnation of Edgar Cayce. And I didn't want to give him a very good picture of me because I didn't want my face to be the cover, so they used the picture, but it had to be really small inside this little nebula. And this book sold pretty darn well for a while. For a while, this was the third best-selling title in Frog's entire New Age catalog. As I went on and got more involved with my source, I realized that I was in contact with this same source, Ra. Now this is, if you think we've gone off the deep end before now, just you wait, because we're only getting started. This source said that it is in the sixth dimension, or sixth density, and that at that level, we all have a higher self, which is this part of us millions of years more evolved than we are, which travels back in time to help us get to the future, to help us spiritually grow. Because let's say that you have a future self that you're going to be, and here's who you are now. And there's a finite number of steps that you have to make to get from here to there. Well, the steps can't be changed, but what if it's like an accordion and you can fold time so that you can make those steps in shorter amount of linear time? That's what the higher self's job is, to teach you spiritually so that you can get there faster. Well, they said that they're at the sixth dimensional level where the higher self is. At that point, you have an entire planet worth of beings who have fused into one consciousness. But it's not like the Borg, like the nasty hive mind thing. This is a positive thing where everybody's thoughts are one. They said they originally started out on the planet Venus 1.5 billion years ago, that it was like Earth and it had people like us, that they evolved and they grew through fourth dimension, fifth dimension. They were now in the sixth dimensional level. Now, there would be no reason why I would believe something so far out as this, except that this data that was in this book, scientifically speaking, correlated with so many other things I had researched, which only came out after the material was channeled in 1981. So how is that possible unless there's something authentic happening? And then I started to have personal relationships with the source. Let me tell you one very interesting story. A woman was having UFO visitations in her apartment. She'd be lying there in bed with her husband in the middle of the night, and there'd be this beaming light coming in the window, and entities would appear in the room, sometimes take her on board the ship. So she found my website, wanted to have a reading. Well, what I would do at that time is I would sleep on it, and I'd wake up in the morning with a dream and then do the reading, and then I'd call the person that afternoon, tell them for 15 minutes, which always ended up being an hour, what the reading said, and then send them a tape in the mail. So I called her up the day after the reading. She knew when it was going to be. And she said, "Did you dream anything last night?" "Oh, yeah." I said, "Yeah, I had this dream where I was stuck inside a giant cathedral." She starts losing it, sobbing, going crazy on the other end of the phone. I'm like, "Are you okay? What is going on here?" She said, "Last night, it happened again." What happened? The light. Outside the window? Yeah. And, well, this man showed up in the room. And he was in a white robe with the gray hair. I know that guy. He said, "I'm going to tell you something very important. You need to write it down, or else you won't remember." She says, "Okay." He says, remember the giant cathedral. So then and she just went nuts. I mean, it was crazy. And so I said, okay, well, I guess this source can make house calls in certain cases. Later on, I'm in North Carolina, visiting a friend, again, an ARE person, who's very into the idea of Edgar Cayce coming back. And I'm out in the field meditating, and you get to a state of divine indifference where you really don't care about anything except the oneness and the peace of that moment. And I open up my eyes, and I see this disc in the sky, right? And it goes behind a cloud, and the cloud blows away, and the disc is gone. Oh, wow. Now I've seen a UFO. I always wanted to see one of those. Okay. The only other thing that I always wanted to happen, that now should happen, is I need to have a ball of light come into my room and give me an intelligent message. So then I kept meditating. Didn't think anything more of it. Call up my father a couple days later. You'll never guess who's on the other end of the telephone. I say, let me guess, my brother. Yeah. Like, Dad, you realize that this is psychic ability, right? Oh, yeah, your ESP thing, whatever. I mean, I actually did eventually prove to my dad that something was going on, because he worked at a publishing office and he had this woman there and I didn't know anything about her. And I walked up to her, held her hand, looked in her eyes, told her whole life story. And I can do that. When I meet somebody new, I can go into this place and I just tell them their life story, and it gets tears and it gets intense and it's really powerful. It's the easiest time to read somebody's when you first meet them, before your mind is colored with any new data. So my brother is talking on the other line, and I say, yeah, I had this really cool thing where I was out in the field meditating, and I see this tiny little disc looking thing, like a metallic thing, and it went behind the cloud, and then the cloud blew away and it was gone. And if it was an airplane, it would have kept on going, but it disappeared. It's like, I always knew there had to be UFOs. I mean, I'm sure this is real, but who cares? The only other thing I said was that I needed a ball of light to appear in my room and give me an intelligent message. My brother goes, what did you say? A ball of light appear in my room, give me an intelligent message. He said, oh my God, what's going on? The other night, I was in my room and I was meditating, and my head started dropping back like this, and I see this ball of light appear in the room. And it gradually lasted 10 minutes. It spread into this vortex on the ceiling that was all like different shades of luminous blue. In the middle it was almost like lightning colored, and then it just got dimmer and dimmer, but there were these layers of it, like ripples on a pond. And it formed this vortex, this cone that was going up into the air. And then I kept watching this, and it finally faded out and formed a kidney-shaped energy between myself and my girlfriend. She had had insomnia, and after this happened, she was able to sleep every night without any trouble. As it was fading, I didn't really want it to go away. I was in such ecstasy. I'm like, this incredible thing is happening to me. And as it was leaving, I heard these words in my mind. And it said, the ascension that your brother is writing about will not happen all at once. It is an experience of cosmic connection to the universe that comes in a sequence of events, increasingly uplifting and amazing. You have just experienced the first of these events. Wow.
Wow. Great.
So it was like they administratively found a way to get this message, which changed how I was talking about ascension, because I always thought of it as kind of like this big switch that was going to go off in the future. And the Law of One series, the source of all this stuff that I was studying, said 2012. Sometime between 2011 and 2013. This was back in 1981, before people were talking about the Mayan calendar or knew what the end date of the Mayan calendar was, but they gave the same time coordinates. history of the Law of One series, the Law of One was channeled by three people: Don Elkins, Carla Ruckert, Jim McCarty. 20 years of research into channeling went into this before they did it. Don Elkins was originally part of the Elkins-Mantell Flying School, a different Elkins than him. He was just a student there. Mantell is the famous crash in which the guy tried to follow a UFO in his airplane and got into the field coming off of it, and it shot all these holes through the ship. There was like a gravity field around the airplane crash so that you had to kind of lean when you went near it. You couldn't stand up straight, kind of like the Santa Cruz mystery spot, which I've visited, or the Oregon vortex. Well, the body was in a horrific state, and there were pores shot through the plane everywhere. So this is part of what got our government guys thinking that that the UFOs could be hostile in their intent. But you got to remember now, we've grown up in a society ever since the late 40s, early 50s, in which we have a mutually assured destruction, nuclear missiles aimed at each other. There's no way, I mean, what does win a nuclear war mean? How do you win a nuclear war? That was, the War Games movie did a really great job of making us clear about that. Now, a lot of these witnesses at the Disclosure Project are saying they saw these UFOs hovering over nuclear missile silos, and they would power down the whole silo. And the missiles were not launch capable. In fact, there were other cases where they were doing a missile test and it's flying through the air, and this orb would appear and start shooting beams at it, and it would clunk down, and it would be completely radioactively inert. There was no radioactivity left. It could not even detonate if you wanted it to. This is just the beginning of where we start to understand that there has been a lot of negative propaganda in films telling you that extraterrestrials are evil. There is a battle going on between good guys and bad guys because there's a lot of different ETs out there. There's a lot of civilizations visiting the Earth. Darwinian evolution is not a viable model. The Law of One series teaches us that the galactic creator, they call it the Logos, created a body design that it then writes into the energy around us. So what that means is the human body shows up on every planet in the galaxy where life can form. It's a natural evolution. Some might get there by an insect, some might get there by a lizard, some might get there by mammals like we do, some might get there by cetaceans, some might get there even by vegetation, apparently. Now this very crazy idea that, you know, trees could detach and walk around, and I realize it would probably be ridiculous to most people, but if you start getting into the idea that life is a field, it explains a lot of very strange things. For example, research has been consistently done on the fruit fly known as Drosophila, in which they alter the DNA so that the eyes don't form. It's a mutant without eyes. No matter what they've done ever to mess with the Drosophila's DNA, after 5 generations the eyes come back. There's another plant that's been used in laboratory studies for 25 years. They mess with the plant. No matter what they do to mess with the DNA to make it alter and mutate, 25% of the time those plants fix their DNA. That means this whole idea of terminator seeds and genetically modified crops will never really happen because nature can rewrite itself and fix the errors in the DNA. But it goes a lot more than that. When you have Dan Burrish, who you guys have interviewed, he's talking about his Lotus project, in which you have a crystal of silicon, basically like quartz, and you just put it in distilled water, purified. You run the whole thing in an autoclave. There's no way that there could be contamination in it. Hit it with a little bolt of electricity, and things start growing in the water. Well, this has been done since the last century, in the 19th century. There are Sir William Crookes is one of the guys who did this, in which he took a volcanic rock, electrified it, put drops of water on it, and these little mites grew out of this murk, and they grew legs, and they detached, and they started walking around. There are other researchers, mostly from the Reich camp, the Wilhelm Reich, with the orgone stuff, because Reich was demonstrating this over and over again in the laboratory. Now, his research has been criticized. He calls it bions. He says that there's these little corpuscles of energy that form living things. But it's since been done under extremely powerful laboratory conditions. Furthermore, Dr. Francis Crick, who was one of the co-discoverers of the DNA molecule, showed that the dust in the galaxy, when you take a line of sight from where we are to the center of the galaxy, 99.9% of that dust in the galaxy has all the spectrographic signatures, all the light waves that you would expect to see from living bacteria. So panspermia, the idea that life was seated on the Earth, it's more than that. Life is the field, the energy that's around us that underlies matter, not electromagnetic energy. There's a deeper energy called torsion fields. That is the energy of consciousness. It's the energy that allows me to be psychic so I can think what somebody else is thinking and have those thoughts come into my mind. It's the energy of source. It's the energy of time. Time is actually not invariant. Time is locally variable. That's one of the really fascinating things you start learning. I've now, as I told you guys, I've met with a variety of black ops scientists. And one of the things that they keep saying again and again is that time can be altered by electromagnetic means, very strong electromagnetic coils. This gets back into the Philadelphia experiment. So I guess this is the time where you guys wanted me to get into the Daniel story.
And certainly Daniel's an interesting place to
Yeah.
start. And you did say that Daniel has, in some ways, you got in touch with us because you said that our Henry Deacon, a lot of what he's come up with has been verified by your relationship with Daniel. Maybe I'm not putting it in the right words.
No. What do I do when I have been given access by extreme, wonderful synchronicity to connect with somebody who was in a black operations, meaning off the government radar of official congressional inquiry into how the funding is being allocated. I get this guy, he tells me stuff that nobody else has ever said in any public forum. I go to this website called Project Camelot, and you guys have the same data. I just about lost it. I said, maybe it's true. You know, I mean, I knew it was true because when you spend enough time with somebody, which I did with this guy Daniel, you know when somebody's telling the truth. If somebody is going to try to attack me and say, well, you know, he was telling a big story, it's like, I'm sorry. I interrogated this guy so many different ways. I have all the science that builds up to the things that he said already in place. I'm now out here in Hollywood. I'm working on a film called Convergence the Movie. I've gotten into the whole system of Hollywood. And I put together a series of data which we're going to make into a movie called Convergence, as I said. This is really where my interest is, more than in trying to say I'm Edgar Cayce. The book came out years ago. I haven't even really done that much to promote it. I don't talk about it on the radio, or, you know, I gave you guys the story. But what I'm really fascinated with is the science of consciousness, and so we're doing a whole film about this. So I have all the science now to get from the mainstream model to these very exotic things that are in the Black Ops community. The Law of One series, which started with channeling in the 50s and went all the way forward from there, is sort of like the base that everything has come from. And everything that I find keeps tying back into this, including the Dan Burrish testimony, including many other testimonies, some of the things that Deacon said. Everything was in this book from 1981. So that tells me that there's some truth in there. Plus the fact that I have a personal experience with this source. And it made 2 house calls, to that woman where the light came in her window and then to my brother in his bedroom. So, getting back to this Daniel situation, I had the opportunity to meet this guy. I had flown to New York. I'd gotten off the plane. I was going to visit my mother. It was wintertime. And we didn't have transportation to get me down. It was like there was a storm. There was ice all over the roads. So I had to stay in a hotel that night, and I needed to eat something, so I got the taxi. I went to the Denny's. And it just so happened before I left that this book had gotten my attention again, the Montauk Project. Now, I'd read this book in the 90s before I ever found the Law of One, and I thought it was completely horsepucky. I just had no interest in it, thought it was ridiculous. But I just said, oh, let me bring it along as reading material. So I had it with me. I'm in this Denny's late at night, And this guy walks past. He kind of looks like a Harley guy, like a biker. A beard, you know, and the leather jacket and everything. And he says, "What do you think about that Montauk project?" I said, "Oh, this is ridiculous. This is a joke. I'm just reading this for entertainment." He said, "Could I talk to you about something?" Okay. So he sits down. He said, "I worked at Montauk." I literally laughed in his face. I said, "You have got to be kidding me." To make a long story short, he gives me this enormous download. I'm scribbling stuff on the back of the napkin and the back of the place thing that they give you at Denny's. And we made a contact, and I've had numerous opportunities to connect with him since that time. And I can't get into a lot of detail. He does not want to come forward. He is terrified of publicity. He has been willing to do some audio work so that he can get his testimony recorded on audio, but I'm going to have to garble his voice. So here's the deal. Apparently, now, first of all, let's not forget, okay, if even one UFO sighting is real, meaning not swamp gas, then we're not alone. And there are UFOs. As soon as you accept that, you have to also accept the fact that they can materialize and dematerialize. So they're winking in and out of our reality somehow. Well, how would they do that? Apparently, the answer is in the seat. Okay, you have a seat in the UFO, and it plugs into your mind, and you think, I want to go to a particular place. You visualize where that place is. This vortex opens up in front of your ship. Your ship flies through the vortex closes behind you, and you end up going where you need to go. So what happens if a disc crashes and our government guys pop the seat out of the UFO and then start tinkering with it? And then what happens if they get help from a particular group of extraterrestrials from Sirius, apparently, and the ETs are telling them, yeah, well, you know, design this coil and build this way and build a big octahedron, like 2 Egyptian pyramids top to bottom. And that's your main antenna. So, to make a long story short, it took a number of years, but there were a series of progressive steps that led to the ability to bring this chair online so that it was fully functional in its intended purpose. The chair had, this is all stuff, now Daniel got hired in at this job. He was an Air Force captain, and he was given a rote sentry position at this place, kind of like a guard, but he also had a variety of tasks that were to be performed. He did not know what was going on. But what happened in the early days was he was in the cafeteria eating his lunch or whatever, and you'd see over in the corner of the room, it would start to burble like a mirage. And then you'd see something that shouldn't be there, like you might see through the wall into the other room. Or you might see a field with green grass or something. And sometimes it would be up near the ceiling, and you know, sometimes it would be in the floor. So it turns out that everybody talked to the janitor. The janitor had somehow gained everybody's confidence. So he started having these meetings with the janitor. The janitor started to tell him what was going on. Now gradually over time, he apparently was indoctrinated and got fully knowledgeable about what was going on. This was an abandoned military base at the far out point of Long Island called Montauk. He did say that the first book in the Montauk Project series was authentic, that pretty much everything in the book is true. He then went on to say that every book since then has been increasingly distorted and not truthful. He knew Al Bielek, he knew Preston Nichols, he knew Duncan Cameron, he knew Stuart Swerdlow. All these guys were there. Duncan ran the chair the best. Duncan was the guy that could run the chair. He had some experience working with the chair. He said that they originally tried to build one reverse engineered, and then that didn't work. They eventually had to go back to the original design, use the actual real chair, not a one that they'd rebuilt. There was something about these Helmholtz coils that had to be altered. So basically what happens is you're in the chair. There's 22, I think he said 22, basic wavelengths that the chair creates that are like your mind waves, your brain waves. And from these 22 wavelengths, all other waves come from your mind. So when you sit in the chair, they would have you go into what they call the quiet point. And this is a point where your mind is perfectly still. Now normally, if you go in the chair and your mind isn't quiet, the waves are going to be, fluctuating all the time. You go quiet and the waves will sort of stop and go to like a fixed point like this. Well, out of the 22, if you have a wave that looks like this, the idea is to get it to go flat. So they would zero out the chair, as it's called, 22 knobs, 22 waves, and you flatten out all the graphs once they get flat. Duncan Cameron apparently was the only person who could get everything perfectly zeroed out, perfectly stable. There was an extremely, extremely enormous power supply that was required to run this chair. It was a non-standard frequency. It was not alternating current 120 hertz. It was some weird decimal point number of hertz that they had to run through the chair. But what would happen is that consciousness would create matter. They found that you could think about an object, like let's say you thought about a particular wooden chair and you visualized the chair would start forming in the room. First maybe very shimmery and sort of like you couldn't even see it, and it would harden up. Depending on how much thought energy you put into it, it would stay solid for a period of time, and then it would dissipate and sort of disappear back into the background. Then they started to find out that if you thought about a particular place, that there would be an opening that would appear and you would go to that place. You could send somebody through it and then they could walk around in there for a while and other people could see them. It was like they were there. And then you'd have to have the person in the chair physically pull them out with conscious intent to get them back out. Now, they did do a lot of experimentation. They sent innocent people through and they were killed. Some of these were street tramps. Some of these were homeless kids. Apparently Swerdlow was responsible for recruiting a lot of the kids. I believe it's possible people can change. Daniel doesn't. He talked about Al Bielek. He said Bielek was a big storyteller, always, had some funny thing going on. Daniel claims he himself never went through the vortex. At some point they realized that they had gone to a place that was not the present, that they had traveled through time. They got very excited about this. Now this is where it gets really strange. It just gets stranger and stranger. Supposedly we have a body that they call the transient body, and then we have a physical body. The transient body is what New Agers would call the astral body. At the point that you're first conceived is called your zero-time reference, or ZTR. That moment is where you have contact with this place called zero-time. Now, the physics model goes like this. If you can imagine space-time like a sheet, everything above the sheet is the world that we inhabit, the reality that we inhabit. Everything below the sheet is this three-dimensional reality that's kind of like where antimatter is. It's like the astral plane, mirror image of where we are now. As you accelerate through space, you start curving space. And eventually it curves around in on itself like a donut. And that's a torus. It's called a torus. If you keep on going, the torus unrolls. Now, because of what I've told you with this sheet thing, you got time in here, space in here. Time is three-dimensional, space is three-dimensional up here. As the sheet curls in, you get time on the inside of the donut. But then as you keep going, the donut unrolls in the other direction. And the time that was down here unrolls and becomes your space. So you're now in a three-dimensional world you can walk around in, you can inhabit, but it's out of phase with our reality, and people in this reality wouldn't see you. You disappear. So this is apparently what was done inadvertently with the Philadelphia experiment. The Philadelphia experiment started with tests that were done on very, very high intensity welding, arc welding of naval vessels. And they had these enormous pieces of steel that they're welding together. They blast it with electrical energy at a very high frequency, and they started to notice that tools would disappear after this, and they couldn't find them. They finally filmed it, and they found that when they blasted this arc welding thing, that there would be this big black hole that would appear in the room. And they discovered that, in fact, it was dematerializing objects and that they wouldn't come back. So this is what led them to do increasing amounts of research, discovering that electrical energy is one way that you can sort of pop this hole between space-time and time-space and get through to this realm down here. Well, they tried to send a ship of sailors through. And unfortunately, apparently there was an inconsistency in the hull. The ship's hull was kind of used like an antenna to allow this energy to form around the ship properly. They put coils on the ship, and there were coils offshore. The ship apparently got caught up in this energy flow. It manifested up in Philadelphia, hence the Philadelphia experiment. It was originally in the Norfolk Naval Shipyard, and then it popped back to the shipyard. The sailors, some of them were actually embedded in the hull. Some of them burst into flames, some of them would appear and disappear because they were here, but if you get energetically tuned to this, then you can flip-flop between the two halves of the torus, so to speak. And the matter in their bodies would do that. So Tesla in the 1920s built something that would stabilize your ZTR, as it's called, your zero-time reference. And let me explain what that means. Here is space-time, here is time-space. In the middle is zero time. You're not in space, you're not in time. When you go in there, apparently it looks kind of gray. And in zero time, we all have a point at which, when we were conceived, where the transient body, or the spiritual body, and the physical body join. As we get older, there's like a widening cone between the physical and the metaphysical self. That forms your biological age. If you mess with the ZTR, it's like you push the top over, but the bottom is still where it is. This gap creates great static, which in some cases causes you to burst into flames, in other cases causes you to go comatose. Sometimes your sense of time gets really screwed up. For example, some of these guys, you'd have to rub their skin for days at a time, the exposed flesh. They would just be paused. Because in their time, only a few seconds have gone by in what amounts to years of time for us, or maybe weeks of time. So by rubbing them, you could eventually get them to slow down and rejoin their time reference with where we are. Now, one of the things Daniel told me was that some people were able to psychically reconstruct the ship from memory. They remembered that they were on a ship. They remembered where the ship was, where the floor was, where the walls were. They were the ones that came out okay. So that was part of the research. Now, since that time, the Philadelphia experiment was not dropped. It has since been parlayed into technologies, including jump gate technology, as I've heard that it's been called, in which they now can warp you from one place to another. There's apparently, as you guys disclosed with Deacon, a stable jump gate between Earth and Mars, and an inhabited base on Mars. I heard that too. Daniel also came across the fact that Mars had been inhabited in ancient history, and that there were artifacts all over the place. He also said he saw a photograph of astronauts waving next to a pyramid in basic NASA spacesuits. So it's not easy when people realize that you've been lied to and that there's a lot that you don't know, but that is the reality of what's happened. So they got a chair out of the UFO and they started to use these same principles and took it even farther. Now, one guy actually was crazy enough to go back in time and kill his father because he wanted to see what would happen, I guess. You know, there's some nasty guys working in Black Ops, and it's also almost a suicide move, you would think. Well, he felt great. I mean, he went and he killed his father, which apparently resolved a lot of anger issues for him. And he came back, I'm fine, you know, everything's fine. The next day, or a couple days later, he stepped out on traffic, got hit by a car, and was instantly killed. So from that, they came to the conclusion that time is like a living fabric that repairs the tears that are made. It repairs the rips that are made as much as it can. The most interesting thing that Daniel ever told me was, of course, well, first of all, before we get to that, Your ZTR determines your absolute biological age. So apparently, if you travel into the future, and your ZTR says you were born in 1956, let's say, you travel into the future 10 years, 15 years down the road, in a matter of a couple hours, your body becomes 10 or 15 years older. When you travel back in time, you revert back to the age you were when you left in a relatively short time. Now this is very anomalous, suggests a very multidimensional component to the biological aging. So they had to find a way to shift the ZTR in order to send somebody through, and Daniel believes they had, but he did not have access to that information. They were taking wavelengths of the psychic's mind, analyzing them, and trying to figure out a way to mechanically generate them so that they wouldn't need the psychic, because they were using a variety of psychics, but Duncan Cameron happened to be the one who had the most success. So they sent people through time. There was a 20-year wave that came out, which apparently was a natural harmonic of the Earth in its rotation. And you could plot on the wave very precisely what time somebody was in by how far the wave went. If the wave got to here and then stopped, they could calculate, okay, well that's 1996, January 15th, or whatever. The wave keeps going. Well, this is what really drove these guys crazy, is that there was a certain point, they were sending people into the future. There was a certain point on that 20-year wave as they're traveling along through a time tunnel in which all the waves, 100-some plus waves from the chair, and that was just the number that they had analyzed. There were hundreds more that they weren't even looking at. The amount of cables coming out of the chair was in this 2-inch by 3-inch thick box coming out. Huge amount of data. All the graphs would go flatline for like 5 or 6 seconds and then come back online. But during that time, you couldn't see anything. The graphs were gone. Well, then they asked the people, what happened to you during this time? And they said, it's the most fantastic thing I've ever experienced in my whole life. It was like I'm one with the galaxy. I could be a star, I could be a planet, I could zoom in on a planet. I had access to all knowledge there ever was to know. I could be a subatomic particle, I could be an atom, a molecule. I could fly anywhere, do anything, know anything, be anything, and it seems like there's no time, it just goes on eternally. It's absolute ecstasy, it's the most wonderful thing I've ever experienced in my whole life, and you do not want to leave. When you first hit it, it's like hitting a really intense bump, like you slam into something. So they called it the bump, or the discontinuity. And the experience of going out of the reality that you know, they called it the full out, that you would have this full out experience. So then all the graphs went silent, drove these guys crazy because they wanted to be able to replay that part and analyze the waves, but they couldn't. So then they're looking at the timeline, and they look at this 20-year wave, and they find out exactly how far it went right up until everything goes flat. And it was December 21st, 2012. So here we get into your whole 2012 thing. Well, the Law of One said something was going to happen in 2012, the channel material I was talking about before. And when Daniel starts telling me this, I'm aware that this is not a guy who's lying, because there were too many things that I asked him, I cross-examined him, I met him on multiple occasions. And then when you guys came out with your Henry Deacon testimony, it really was fascinating. So before we go any further, I want to make sure I mention my website. My website is divinecosmos.com, divinecosmos.com. And you can read about more of this testimony, more of all this kind of stuff I'm talking about. There's audio interviews that I've done in an archive. We have a great CD series that we've put together called The Science of Peace, which goes into a lot of the consciousness science, the understanding this stuff. Now, this is what I came to. We have a zero-time reference when we're born. Time and space become one at the moment of our conception. Daniel doesn't agree with me, but I believe that 2012 is the ZTR of the Earth. That it's a new birth of the Earth's energy body. And it makes a lot of sense. So it's at that moment that we have this implosion and everything kind of comes together. Now, Don Elkins, the guy who was the questioner of the Law of One series, has access to channeling materials that were brought through with the help of this guy, W.B. Smith, who you'll encounter frequently if you read about ufology. W.B. Smith worked for Canada in the Defense Ministry and was the only officially sanctioned program that investigated this global grid. It was called Project Magnet. The idea that there's this energy grid on the Earth of crisscrossing lines. When you hear Dan Burrish's testimony, he talks about natural stargates. Those are points where these lines cross. They form nodes. A node is basically a dimensional crossing point. Now you have two counter-rotating geometries on the Earth. One that pretty much stays stable and has determined the shape of the continents, and then there's another one that we don't see which counter-rotates. And as the two go through each other, at certain points the nodes will cross. If those node points cross together and you have a favorable planetary alignment at the same time, you get this surge of energy in which space-time and time-space, there's that crossing point briefly. The Bermuda Triangle is a natural stargate. If these two grids cross over each other, the nodes connect, the alignment is right, then you can end up flying through this vortex and fly clear into time-space and end up not in our reality anymore. The reason why all this stuff is important is that 2012 literally represents a vortex activity across the entire Earth. That's what my research has conducted, that I've concluded from the research. Every person on Earth, except for maybe some of the people that are on the negative spiritual path called service to self, but almost everybody on Earth is going to go through this vortex experience, which is an ecstatic thing. It's not a terrifying or painful event at all. It's similar to how the full out happens. Our whole planet goes into that. Now, I read about ascension and all these things for a long time, and I said, how could this be possible? How could something like this happen? There would have to be a massive surge of energy in the solar system that would be demonstrating this. The work that W.B. Smith was doing in the 50s with people who were contacted by UFOs shows that they had information coming through from channeling, which was very accurate. Smith had a list of 200 questions, specific questions about UFOs, and he only took the people where the channel answered every question the same way. And sometimes the questions were a little bit different, and the channel would say, well, that's because the person is a Christian and they're biasing it with their religious beliefs. Something like that. Anyway, all these channels said the same thing, and one of the things that they kept saying was the whole solar system is going to get charged up with energy. You're going to see all the planets changing, and you're going to see a transformation occur. Earth changes, cataclysmic changes will seem to be happening, but then there's going to be this big energetic event, and the Earth will be propelled into a golden age. There is what's called a three-way split when this happens. Some people stay on the positive path. Those are the people that stay with the Earth. The Earth becomes fourth dimensional activated. When you have an out-of-body experience, which I've done, you fly up into the sky, you go above a certain point. It's kind of like a ceiling. For a long time I couldn't get past the ceiling. It drove me nuts because I wanted to go into space. And I couldn't get past the ceiling. Well, eventually I was able to do that, punch through. You punch through the ceiling and there's a new Earth underneath you. And you fly up again and you punch through another one, there's a new Earth again. And there's buildings and there's cars and there's people, and these are like the afterlife planes where people go after they've physically died. You go high enough, you go up to the seventh one, and it's all like Stonehenge, and there's all these people walking around in robes and headbands, and they're all very friendly to you, and they say hello, and they know that you're there, but they're really kind of surprised to see you. And I've been there a couple times. And then if you go past that, then you go out into space, and typically you end up, finding yourself on a UFO pretty quickly, because they see you and they find you, and you hang out and talk to the ETs, and most of them are very friendly. I've never really had a negative ET experience myself. I know other people have, but so to make a long story short, there's a plane that is concentric with the Earth as a globe, which would be up in the sky, probably even above the altitude you're flying at when you're in an airplane. And that's going to be where people live who are on the positive path as this happens. Now, it does get a little evangelical sounding. The Christian prophecy, Jesus mentioned something that they call the rapture. There are lines in the book of Daniel talking about where there are two, then there shall be one. Two shall be walking in the field, then there shall be one. Two shall be making wine, then there will be one. All this stuff. But you got to remember, Christianity is not the only religion that has this prophecy. It runs through Aboriginal prophecy, Hindu prophecy, Buddhist prophecy, Native American prophecy. Pretty much, you know, the Ragnarok is the Celtic legend. Pretty much any ancient wisdom teaching you find says something discontinuous, spontaneous, and amazing, leading to a golden age, is going to happen on the earth. I don't think that this pole shift thing will happen until after this happens, and most people will have popped through it before the pole shift ever occurs. Now, again, this is really lunatic fringe stuff. However, I did the research. I looked through countless reams of websites and printed them out. I have a huge bookshelf we could film if we have time to show you all the research I did. NASA studies, again and again, showing every planet in the solar system except for Mercury, but the Sun, Venus, Mars, Earth, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, all of them are having massive climate change. They're getting brighter, they're getting hotter, the magnetic field is growing larger. In some cases, like Saturn, they're rotating at a different speed.
You did all this research for Richard Hoagland, isn't
That's
that right?
correct, yes.
And actually are working with Hoagland.
That's correct.
On this, and he's published some of your research.
Yeah, I had first found out about this from the work of Dr. Oleksiy Dmitriev, who's a Russian scientist. He published in 1997, but he didn't have NASA data. He had, you know, Russian data. So I ended up talking to Hoagland about this in 2004, and I'd done a little bit more research, but not too much, and we were talking on the phone, and he said, David, you've got to do it. You've got to get the whole thing from NASA. If this is true, it's the biggest story we've got. So I just hit the books, and I just went nuts on the internet, Googling and research. And what I came out with is a very impressive document, which your contact, Henry Deacon, said was, you know, everything you need to know about what's going on in the solar system. Now,
okay, and that document is called?
It's called Interplanetary Day After Tomorrow. It's a paper that I wrote with Richard Hoagland. You can find it on his website, which is enterprisemission.com. You can also find links to it on my page, and I'm going to be putting up a concise version of all the data in the future that you can read at divinecosmos.com. Why is this important? This gets back into the studies from the Russians about DNA, dealing with a particular experiment that was done. First of all, we have Dr. Glenn Ryan, an American scientist, who showed he took placenta DNA from a human placenta, put it in a test tube, and had people trained to create certain emotional states. They'd hold the test tube, and they'd feel like the greatest anger, rage you can imagine, or they'd feel the love of a mother for a newborn baby, the most pure, unconditional love. And what Dr. Ryan found, R-E-I-N is how you spell his name, is that when you feel the love, the DNA unwinds. And in order for when the helix unwinds, the messenger RNA can go in and grab the code and build life, build healing, build the healing of your body, the healing of cancer, diabetes, whatever. The anger causes the DNA to knot up like a braid of hair, and then you can't get healing at all. Now, this is the kind of data that I went into great detail about in my MP3 series, The Science of Peace, which is available on my site. And that's where I went through all this with this man who won 9 Grammys in music. His name is Larry Sire. We did a whole musical soundtrack for it. It's wonderful. I'm just giving you a little bitty taste of it right now. But anyway, so that proves on a microbiological level that DNA is an antenna for consciousness. It's tuned to the mind and to the soul. Well, now you have to get into this guy, Dr. Peter Garriev, who first conducted research called the DNA phantom effect. He put DNA in a little room in which it can absorb light, and all the light gets stuck in the DNA and spirals through the molecule. It doesn't stay in the room. The DNA is like a light sponge, which is really weird, right? But then you take the DNA out of the tube and the light keeps on spiraling as if the DNA was still there holding it in place, but there's no DNA. And guess how long it stays like that? How long do you think? You watching this, 30 days. 30 days the DNA continues to act even though it's not there anymore. This is what we call a latent structure, latent structuring effect. And this is a common feature of what the Russians call torsion fields, which I get into great detail about in the Science of Peace CD series on my website, Divine Cosmos. Anyway, Gergiev went further than that. He took a frog embryo and a salamander embryo, takes a non-burning laser, shines it through the salamander embryo, redirects the light into the frog embryo. All he's doing is beaming light. They're hermetically sealed containers. What do you think happened? Well, you don't really want to go there, but remember what we said about the Drosophila, the fruit fly? Take the DNA of the eye code out. 5 generations later, the eyes pop back on. You have this plant, you make it mutate, standard laboratory plant, 25% of the time, the mutation is healed. So what do you think happens if you shine the energy of a salamander embryo into a frog embryo, just the light beam? The frog embryo completely retools itself 100% and becomes a salamander, and there is no genetic evidence of it ever having been a frog whatsoever. Now, if we want to get really off into the far fringes of things, you have this secret group that we've heard a lot about called the Illuminati. And they're very into bloodlines, and they say there's magical power in the bloodline. And that's why there's these 13 families, and they don't intermarry, and that's why if you're in the Illuminati, you're born into the Illuminati. I do believe that they exist. I've spoken to witnesses who were members of it, who got out. But they're all into this magic power of the blood. But what did I just tell you, right? You can take a salamander embryo, send that energy into a frog. Well, what if your body is the frog, and the salamander energy is like the cosmos, the logos, the galactic creator? That's what the Great Pyramid was built for. You sit in the tomb, the open coffin in the pyramid. The pyramid is a centralizing, focusing spiral of energy. It takes this energy and makes it into a spiral. And I don't have the time to describe the physics of how this works. It's in Science of Peace. But you can experience ascension in the pyramid. That's what it was built for. It was built as a chamber of healing. So the Illuminati are the inheritors of this Atlantean science, which was then distorted according to the Law of One series thousands and thousands of years ago. 7,000, 8,000, 9,000 years ago, these negative entities got involved and changed the teaching and put it in a more negative direction. And that's where you get into the sacrifices and all these things that the Mayans ended up doing, and the secret orders end up doing these things. And sacrifices is one way to open up a shift between space-time and time-space. In the death process, you pop a hole through the veil temporarily. It's a conscious energy, so in a ritual, people can focus that energy and use it for something, including creating this opening. Especially if you're at a natural Stargate kind of thing. There are technological means to do this also. Now, I am not a supporter of animal sacrifice or any other type of sacrifice. I think it's something that you will end up paying for karmically. That's the thing that's really crazy about the secret orders. It's not that I dislike them as people. I've known a lot of people that are in these groups. It's more that they just have a fundamental misunderstanding of how consciousness really functions, which is a loving creation that we live in. Dan Burrish's data talks about a group of entities from Orion. That is mentioned in the Law of One series. The Law of One series says the Orions are a negative group. Negative meaning that they have an intention to try to take over, to try to control people through fear. So these Orions, according to Dan Burrish's testimony, come from the future, travel back in time, and they're trying to fix their genetic code. They're trying to fix their DNA. And they say that it's because they were bred from a small number of people who survived a cataclysm on Earth. Well, put your thinking cap on. What did we just learn about DNA, right? DNA is something that is modified by an outside energy. You can take a salamander's embryo, zap it, redirect it into a frog's embryo, the frog transforms. So the universe, even if you have a small population, you can still rejuvenate your DNA by consciousness. That's not what's happening to the J-Rods. The J-Rods are experiencing what the Law of One referred to as the dissolution of the spirit body. When you're on the negative path, meaning a path where you create fear and you're trying to manipulate and control others, eventually you get to a point where your soul cannot hold its charge. Your soul begins dissolving, and it actually affects your DNA. Now this is in the 80s. This is 1981. Burrish's testimony comes out in 2000, 2001. I saw this and I said, oh my gosh, this is a direct validation of what's in the Law of One series. You have to realize that There's two opposing factions according to Burrish. There's the Illuminati on one side, and then there's the neocons on the other side, Majestic, or the Order of Death, as Alex Jones just called it in his documentary, which is now #1 on Google video at the moment. So you have two groups. The Illuminati believes in a Luciferian philosophy. Imagine that if you're this secret society, you've been around for thousands of years, and then this group comes along and says they're Christian, and they start torturing and killing all your people, and telling you that your knowledge is evil, and that you're a bad person. Your natural instinct is going to be to say, okay, well, whoever they say is the bad guy must be the good guy. Oh, well, Lucifer was the angel who had the most amount of wisdom and light, God's brightest angel, who was tossed out of heaven. Well, wherever he got thrown out from, that's not where we want to be, because these Christians are torturing us, persecuting us, killing us. The Christians are suppressing science because they only say the Bible's way. They're suppressing your natural instincts. They don't want you to have sex. They don't want you to procreate, except under, unique circumstances with a legal contract marriage. So the Illuminati got started as a natural rebellion of these secret orders to what was already being established. They brought in the Egyptian gods, Isis, Osiris. Osiris is represented in Egyptian mythology by the severed phallus, the penis, which is symbolized by the obelisk. Isis is symbolized by a woman holding the torch, which represents the secret mystery school teachings, and the book, which represents the mystery school teachings. And then she has these rays coming off of her head. Torch, book, rays on the head. American sculpture, harbor of New York City. Ah, the Statue of Liberty. Obelisk, Washington Monument. So this is back of the dollar bill. Pyramid, eye on top. They hide it right out in front of you, and they laugh at you. They laugh at you because you don't understand. I have been with these guys, I have been in the room with them, and they laugh at the average person at how stupid they are. In their mind, stupidity. I don't agree with that, but it is nonetheless amazing that they put the information out there. If you want to know it, you can know it. But so few people believe it, and they're smug with their sarcasm, and I don't believe any of this stuff. But here's the deal. The 2012 thing is about consciousness evolution. It's about love. It's about choosing to love. All you have to do to get to be a part of the earth that's coming is be slightly more focused on loving people and helping them rather than manipulating them and controlling them. If you have 10 things that you do each day, 5 of them are negative, meaning you manipulate and control people. 5 of them are positive, meaning, oh yeah, you can get in front of me in traffic, or let me help you across the street. If it's a perfect mix of 5 to 5, then you're still not going to make it. But if you're at like 51%, meaning that 49% of the things that you do are selfish and manipulative and controlling, as long as you're 51%, you're going to go through this vortex, you're going to end up in the earth, in fourth density as it's called. How am I supposed to rectify it when I get to LA, 7 years after I did these tapes, I had 20 tapes, 25 or more tapes that I hadn't transcribed. I was in a bad relationship and I just stopped transcribing. You remember the stacks of tapes on my desk, right? 7 years later, my dreams are saying, you got to transcribe these tapes now. I'm in Hollywood. I'm working on a movie. 7 years ago when I did this channeling, I was living in the loft of a barn, working in construction. I wasn't even making enough money from my readings to do it full time. It was like 1998 and early 99. I sit down, I start transcribing these tapes from 7 years ago. They're talking about 2012, they're talking about ascension, and they're also talking about my being in LA, my working on a film, all these things. It's the names of the people I'm working with, the cat that the guy, our editor, had, all the personalities, even to the point where I had these sweet potatoes I bought at the health food store, and they went to sprout on my refrigerator. And then I go back to this tape from 7 years ago, and it's describing sweet potatoes going to sprout on the top of a refrigerator. 7 years from then is when this happened. We have 7 years from now to 2012. I get readings where they're saying what my future is 7 years in the future. In the same reading, they're saying what's going to happen after 2012, that we're going to have this world that's 100 times more harmonious than what we're living in now. This is a world in which you can levitate yourself, you can manifest instant healing, instant telepathic communication, nobody can keep a secret. It's totally harmonious because there's no secrets. You can fly. It's ascension. It's Jesus in John 14:12 said, "As I do these things, so shall you do them and greater things, for I go unto my Father." Now again, I'm not a fundamentalist, I'm not a Bible thumper, but I know it's not fashionable to be Christian, especially because of the war on terror and how that's all gotten manipulated into the next crusade. But nonetheless, don't you think that maybe Jesus knew what he was talking about? Don't you think that maybe enough people witnessed what he was doing that this is based on real testimony and is not all a fabrication like some books have said? Whenever I would read one of these books that would start saying that Jesus was made up and it was fictional, I would start getting all these thought forms of evil. And I got messages saying, look, he was real. I mean, he got blown way out of proportion in terms of people making him into the only Son of God. That was never intended. Jesus would say, I'm the Son of Man. But what if this rapture thing is real? Well, you have a whole scenario in the book of Revelations describing an Antichrist, which had gotten worldwide power, that was wounded on the side and yet did live. And the mark of the beast on the forehead. The mark of the beast is people shutting down their third eye. It doesn't have anything to do with microchipping. None of that stuff is going to happen. They might want it to happen, they meaning Illuminati or those type of people, but it won't happen. I really don't see, prophetically speaking, a negative future for humanity. I see predominantly a positive future. I have had dreams in which the entire pantheon of neocons in the Bush administration ends up being held accountable for what they've been doing, which involves manipulation and control. I think we're heading into a very interesting time in the future. I do not see massive, irreversible economic collapse. The vast majority of people on the inside in both groups, the Majestic and the Illuminati, are now well aware of this 2012 thing that's going to happen. They only see it as a cataclysm, because when you're working from separation and control, some of the people that are on that path will probably experience pole shift. But you have this three-way split. So
what happens to the other two branches? Because you're talking about a three-way split, and you've talked about the good side.
Right. The vast number of people at this point, although it's changing, are stuck in what the Law of One called the miasma of indifference. What that means is the average person on this planet has not chosen whether they're service to self or service to others, meaning they have not chosen whether they want to manipulate people or whether they want to love people. That's what it really boils down to. Now, in the secret orders, you have some very cynical people in there. You're born into this thing where you're abused from the time you're born. You have to go to these rituals at night. You're seeing these slicers and dicers, as they call them in the lower echelons. But the vast majority of the people in the Illuminati don't like what's happening and would get out if they could. They don't like it. But they're stuck because if you try to escape, they kill you. You have to go to these meetings starting from 1:30 in the morning till about 4 o'clock in the morning. So you end up going to sleep with your clothes on 2 times a week, and you're indoctrinated with all this cult teaching, and they tell you you're going to be this wonderful leader in the New Order, and they want to have control over the earth because they inherited this ascension prophecy. They know it's coming. That's why it's on the dollar bill. Novus Ordo Seclorum, New World Order. Annuit Septus, he has looked with favor on our beginnings. The pyramid, without the capstone, is 6-sided. Okay, you have the 4 sides, the bottom and the top. That's 6. What happens when you put the capstone on? How many sides do you get then? The top eliminates. You only have 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the bottom is 5. In pyramid numerology, 6 means imperfection, evil. 5 means perfection and divinity. So the capstone returning to the pyramid represents the New World Order, the New Age, which originally was not a bad thing. So our insiders are now aware of this. People say, well, why are they deficit spending? Why are they running up the national debt so much? And why are they polluting the atmosphere and cutting down the rainforest and nuclear missiles and da-da-da-da-da-da-da? How can they be doing this? It's almost like they're not planning for the future. They don't think it's going to matter. Well, that's true. What does it matter if you pollute the earth? What does it matter if there's global warming? So this is what starts to make sense out of all the madness. Why
So this is two. You've talked about two.
Right. So there's two. Right. I'm sorry I didn't answer the question expediently.
Okay. And so we have a third group. What happens?
There's the negative group graduates 4D negative. That's a very small number, and that's the people who become the J-rods and the P52s, the P45s, P24s. Those are all your negative graduates. They stay with the Earth. They experience pole shift. They experience cataclysm. Some of them are underground. Some of them are on the surface. The ones on the surface are the P52s that go to Orion. The ones underground are the J-rods, the P45s. Most people on Earth pop into time-space, the one down here, and they recreate the Earth exactly as it had been, except that now you're in fantasy land. You can levitate if you choose to. You can see beings of light. Highly advanced before our current one, which in most people's mind, you think of BC, you think of cavemen, right? Well, BC is only, 100 generations ago, and that's not a whole lot of time, really. So basically speaking, we have a much older history. So all this stuff is coming into my mind. I had started to write my dreams down when I got sober. That was part of my recovery process, because dreaming is a very important part of the lucid dreaming process. You have to capture a dream when it comes in, and then meditate on it and visualize yourself becoming lucid, meaning that you say, oh my God, I'm in a dream. I can levitate things. I can fly. I can snap my fingers and go to a whole different place. I can create people to talk to. I can create objects. I mean, I've had a number of these, and they are absolutely fantastic. But you have to remember your dreams and then repeat this line to yourself. Next time I'm dreaming, I want to remember to recognize that I'm dreaming. That's the key line. Next time I'm dreaming, I want to remember to recognize that I'm dreaming. So I already had a lot of experience remembering dreams. So I start remembering dreams, and I start getting all this information coming in from books. I read 500 books in 3 years. I had a list of all of them, and I submitted my application in the Ropa Institute, which is a graduate school in Boulder, Colorado, in transpersonal psychology, which is sort of like metaphysical psychology. And I handed them this list, and I said, name any book, and I'll give you a discourse on it. And I didn't get accepted, probably because my financial situation wasn't very good. Came back from Boulder. Now we're into 1996. I'd been doing this research for 3 years. And I was like, okay, why am I so compelled? Why can I not stop reading these books? I'm just so obsessed. There's got to be something more to this. I start having dreams in which UFOs fly overhead, and something shoots out of the UFO, and it comes spinning down, lands on the ground, and it's a telephone. And it starts ringing. Oh, shit. Yeah. Wow. And then I had this other dream where this E.T. kind of walked up to me, and all these books start flying out from behind it like a cyclone, and they're hitting me in the face, and it hurts, kind of. But as each book is flying past me, all these books that I'd read, it's like all the knowledge in the book comes into my mind at once. And I start seeing how it all fits together in this dream. It was like this incredible telepathic, overwhelming blast. And I woke up, and I'm like, what does this mean? It's almost like they're saying, because if you're watching these videos and you're into the UFO subject, you kind of say to yourself, yeah, it's all out there, right? It's all something I'm reading about. This is like it comes into your mind, it's personal, it's part of you now, and it's what they want to talk to me, they want to have a conversation, they meaning whoever they is. What finally happened was I had a dream that said, okay, here's what's going to happen. You'll be able to hear, it was a ghost that was talking to me in the dream, and he said, you can hear me, but nobody else can. So I'll tell you what to say, and then you just dictate it into a tape recorder. So here I am. I've read 500.
Wilcock, and we're very happy to be invited to his humble abode, which is not so humble, and won't say where. And David, welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Kerry. I've had the opportunity to be in the right place at the right time on many occasions with some really amazing people. And I've had a lot of really interesting experiences of my own, going all the way back to very early in my life. I read this book actually when I was 7 years old. It's called How to Make ESP Work For You by Harold Sherman. This book talks about ESP as if it were something that most people didn't understand, didn't know about. And that surprised me. Most kids in my grade were reading Clifford the Big Red Dog. And this book was obviously a lot more intense than anything most kids would read at my age. There were no pictures. It was kind of scary. You're looking at these little bitty words and trying to, follow it. But I was just so fascinated as a child with the concepts that that I just got into it. And the other thing that I felt really drawn to at that age was books on hypnosis. And I've read both of these books beginning when I was 7 years old as well. I somehow felt that there was a connection between hypnosis and ESP, and didn't understand why I felt that way until much later. The next book that I really read was Erica Cheatham's Nostradamus Prophecies, 1985 and Beyond. This is when I first got into the idea that there was going to be some kind of event around the year 2000, which Nostradamus scholars typically would say is a cataclysmic event, a nasty event. And I saw that special on HBO where the Russian nuclear missiles are going to blow up the U.S. and they had Orson Welles narrating, and he goes into great detail about Nostradamus' prophecies. What triggered, why would a 7-year-old kid read books like this? Why would you be inspired to conduct such research at such a young age? Well, I was unusually intelligent, but more importantly, when I was 5 years old, I had a really pivotal event in my life, which was an out-of-body experience. I woke up in the middle of the night, and I was floating over my own body in bed, and I looked down and saw myself breathing, so it was clear that I was still alive. But I couldn't make sense out of why I was in two places at the same time, and why I still had these funny yellow pajamas with the red cuffs. Well, the event had such an impact on me that I saved 100 books. I get on the internet, and by this point I had come across material called Ascension, or some people were calling it Pole Shift. I read the Nostradamus stuff, so I said, well, what's really going on here? Now, up until this point, I had almost entirely read empirical, science-oriented books about ufology, about metaphysics, about Atlantis. However, at this point, I started to get more into the possibility that somebody could intuitively communicate with these guys. I found a book by Dr. Norman Milanovich called We the Arcturians. And I wasn't 100% convinced, but I was relatively compelled by it. Then I found a book by Dr. Scott Mandelker called From Elsewhere. And I don't have it in front of me here, but this book says on the cover, the subculture of those who claim to be of non-earthly origins. I looked at it in the store, and I'm like, this guy is really far out. But I held the book between my hands, which I would do, psychometry, and it was tingling so incredibly. It was like, it was electrical. Wow, all right. So I opened the book to the back, and it said, if you can answer these 12 questions in the affirmative about yourself, then you very likely are an extraterrestrial soul in a human body who's forgotten who you really are. Now, this is really far out, way, way fringe stuff, but by this point I'd read 500 books on the fringe. It was like, okay. I start reading these questions, and it's like the most personal, insightful, almost invasive psychological description of who I really was underneath the mask that I'd ever seen. And I couldn't believe it. He doesn't even know me, and yet he knows me better than anybody, even my parents. How did that happen? And he's saying that this has to do with being an extraterrestrial soul in a human body. So I just devoured this book. This was in November of 1995, after I graduated college in 95. I go to my friend Jude's house. Jude and I did music together a lot, because I'm also a drummer and a composer. And Jude and I did automatic writing together on his suggestion, where you hold the pencil in your left hand, let it do what it wants to do. And I didn't think it was going to work. I thought it was kind of hokey. But we really meditated, and I felt this conscious connection to my third eye and trying to pull in energy from there. And all of a sudden, and the question we asked was, am I a wanderer, which is what they call these extraterrestrial souls. Am I a wanderer? I start feeling something coming in really strong, and I pull here really strong, and for all of 2 or 3 seconds, my left hand jumped into activity and did all this stuff, and I dropped the pen. Oh my God. Jude, turn on the lights. Something happened, man. This is crazy. So we turn on the lights, and the paper looked completely white. It was like, oh, what the hell? But then we looked really close, and it was very, very faint pencil. And it says, my hand had written forward and backward on the same line, and there were curves that intersected, and only because they collided with each other did it say, the pajamas. They became sacred pajamas, and I never washed them again. I never wore them again. These pajamas were in 2 places at once, and I didn't understand how that could be, and so they became very sacred to me. I wake up the next morning, very excited. I tell my father, and he says, oh, you just had a dream. I went to school, and I told the kindergarten teacher, Mrs. DeMazzi. She says, you just had a dream. Now, bear in mind, I was a typical silly kid. Mrs. DeMazzi told my friend Chris and myself to go trim the Christmas tree, and so we proceeded to take our little scissors and start cutting branches off the tree. So, you know, I did kid things. I had rocks in my pocket and paper clips and gumballs, but at the same time, once this out-of-body thing happened, I saved the pajamas, and I said, I got to get another chance, because if I hadn't have been afraid, I wouldn't have stayed in the house, and I probably would have gone somewhere really fascinating. And I had so many UFO dreams where, in some cases, I would end up talking to someone who looked like, after I saw the movie Star Wars, it became Obi-Wan Kenobi. And he said that something really amazing was going to happen in the future on Earth, and that I had some kind of role in it, and that I would be guided. And most of the conversations I couldn't remember when I woke up, but I would be so overwhelmed with the emotion of the loss of this contact with him that I would wake up and just be devastated by the fact that I had lost that connection.
If we fast forward from that, which is a wonderful introduction to who you are today, you at some point became aware that you could be the reincarnation of Edgar Cayce.
Right. I did read the ESP book, and he said the younger you are when you start doing these exercises, the more psychic you'll be. I'm like, I'm already 7 years old. What am I? I'm never going to be very good now. Should have been doing this since I was 2. I read this book, Stephen LeBerge, Lucid Dreaming, and then Exploring the World of Lucid Dreaming in high school, and was able to have lucid dreams based on the techniques in this book. I would end up on the main deck of UFOs and talking to beings, and LeBerge's perspective is, hey, this is just your mind. There's nothing real about any of this stuff. So I would just wake up and laugh and be like, none of this means anything. In college, I quit using alcohol and all intoxicating chemicals. I did smoke some marijuana, and I quit that in my sophomore year. 6 months later, a friend comes in to my room. He had traveled a long distance to see me, and he was white as a sheet of paper, and he said, I got to tell somebody what just happened. What are you talking about? He said, I just had a conversation with my physics professor, and he said UFOs are real. Give me a break, man. Come on. So, but I was curious enough that I had him keep talking, And he basically said the physics professor offhandedly mentioned UFOs are real, and he was the star pupil, so after class he talked to the professor, and the professor said, yeah, we know this is true, we meaning NASA. He had worked in the higher echelons of NASA for 11 years. We know this is true, but we're never going to let it go out on the main headline of the New York Times. And the reason why is that we shock tested the public with War of the Worlds and found out that they really can't handle the truth. Because they're going to think that they're being invaded, they're going to think, they're going to panic, the economy is going to go belly up, so we just can't let this out. So there's a gradual indoctrination going on, getting people into this information. He said that the ship had a panel all the way around the bottom, and they pulled it off expecting to see components inside, and instead all they saw was this ceramic. So for a couple of years they didn't know what they were looking at, and they finally looked at the ceramic under magnification, high magnification, and saw all these lines on it. It turns out that this was a gigantic computer chip that ran the whole width of the ship, and it was a superconducting ceramic material, which means that electrons would flow through it without any loss. Now, from this, the professor said that we got fiber optics. They found burnt edges of fiber optic cables in the ships. We got Teflon, the non-stick material. It's a special material. We got Kevlar, bulletproof vests came from reverse engineering. Laser beams pass between two mirrors. One of them is semi-permeable, a beam comes out. Lasers came from the ships. LED lights came from the ships. Infrared night vision came from the ships. They looked through the porthole windows and they saw this green you could see outside at night. And computer chips, obviously. So what this really means is that most of the technology that we now have, including the technology that's recording my voice and that we're filming with, would not exist if it were not for this sort of celestial inheritance that we got in the 40s. Well, that just screwed my head right off. And for 2 weeks, I'd be walking down the street, I'd see a manhole cover, I'd think of UFOs. I'd go to the cafeteria, I'd have a plate on my... I'd be eating off this plate thinking of UFOs. I just couldn't get it out of my mind. After 2 weeks' time, I said, if this is real, and I believed it was, because he went into propulsion systems, how they could get to light speed. He went into 3 different types of occupants they found in the ships. If this is real, it's the most important thing there could possibly be to study. I finished college and I got my bachelor's degree in psychology and I got a PhD in UFOs. This was the director of communications for the Apollo missions. Okay, this guy is the real deal, high-end NASA scientist who came forward in 1995 to say that they had discovered ruins on the moon, architecture on the moon. Well, this book went into so much detail about ancient civilizations and obviously showing that some sort of intelligence interfaced with ancient civilizations to get us to where we are now and to create these artifacts that we find all around the world. I became quite compelled with the evidence he presented, showing me that there had to have been a civilization that was